Welcome back to the Pro Football Pod. We, like all other people, are people and experience technical difficulty sometimes, and that's what's going on right now. So, no camera from Coach this week,
No camera coach.
but Justin's going to pull a double action on entertaining you guys with that face. So, yep, there he goes. So, let's get it started. We are bringing you guys exactly what you're looking for, trade targets. This Saturday is trade deadline for a lot of leagues. I don't know what NFL does because who the hell plays in an NFL league? But Yahoo's this week and ESPN is next weekend. So we're gonna bring you guys some people to target.
I
Maybe
don't
even
know one soul that plays in the NFL.com fantasy league.
so. Shout out to the son of one of the people I work with. He was actually gonna join the Pro Football League, but things didn't work out. He only has an NFL league.
That is
And
wild.
you actually do know somebody. Shout out Cody Reed. Cody Reed also runs it with the NFL.
Yeah, shout out.
Shout out
Shout out
Cody
Coda
Reed.
Reed.
So yeah, we're gonna give you guys some people to target, also some people to stay away from, and maybe even like, hey, I've got this person, and I'm gonna run it with the whole league, and that's not gonna happen. So I'm gonna start it off with that, with something that's really near and dear to my heart, and hopefully everyone in one of my leagues isn't listening to this, but if you have Tua Tagovailoa on your team, you should probably think about not having him anymore. He's been amazing, and he's probably carried you all the way to this point in the year. But he's got, if not the roughest, one of the roughest all time playoff schedules.
Yeah, as much as it hurts, I do have to agree with you. He has one of the hardest remaining rest of season schedules, and if not the hardest playoff schedule. And me as a Tua owner in two of my three leagues, one of them being the Pro Football League, I have no idea how I did it, but I got Dak Prescott off the waiver wire 2 weeks
Oh,
ago,
nice.
and he has the best remaining schedule for fantasy
The
purposes.
opposite, yeah.
Yeah, so as much as it hurts me, Tua is probably going to be on the bench here for a good bit. Now, my other league with Tua, I have Kyler. So I'm going to be on the fence quite
Well,
a
I'm
bit.
going to tell you, Kyler also, just like Dak, has an amazing playoff schedule. Before I pull up all of his stats, I just want to bring up Tua. So, Tua plays week 14, which in some leagues, even though there's bye weeks, that is the beginning of the fantasy playoffs. Week 14 is Tennessee. Then he goes to Miami to play the New York Jets for the second time in 3 games. But New York Jets is 28th against quarterbacks for a freaking reason. And they've played a lot of good quarterbacks and nobody's done anything against them. Then they played Dallas for most teams' fantasy playoffs, which is week 16. And then, in case your fantasy playoffs ends week 17, don't worry, you get Baltimore. They're the hardest team against quarterbacks so far this year. So, yeah, no problems there, right?
Now, I'm not going to sniff at the Jets. Like, I know fantasy purposes, they are pretty solid, or, pretty poor against quarterbacks for, you just gave the stat there. But just knowing the Dolphins, like me and you know them just because, ride or die, the Jets defense and that style of defense that they play is the exact style of defense that has given the Dolphins troubles, especially in the Mike McDaniel era.
Mm-hmm.
So those two games, no matter either both my in Miami or in New York, like they both terrify me. Like for fantasy purposes, not so much playoff seeding purposes, because I think at this point the Dolphins pretty much just beat the teams you're supposed to beat and you're going to coast in. But yeah, for the looking at the rest of the season right now, a lot outside of Tyreek Hill, I think even Jalen Waddle is a possibility of maybe trying to see if you can't trade him out
So, I had
because
somebody asking
he's a
me.
you can get a good bit for him still because it's not like you oh well because he has a bad schedule you're going to trade very little for him, but I still, I would look to get him off of my roster. If your name's not Tyreek Hill, then I'm sketched.
And that's the point that I'm glad that you made. Tyreek Hill is a matchup proof monster. He hasn't had a great game the 3 games that they've lost against tough defenses and just in general tough matchups, but he is matchup proof. He's going to hit 2,000 yards this season, and he's only got 1,000. So you're going to get another 1,000 yards out of Tyreek Hill between now and the end of fantasy playoffs. He's probably not even going to play week 18 because we're going to have locked up the division by then. And whether or not we're playing for the number 1 seed is the only thing that'll keep him in. So, yeah, I think Tyreek Hill, even as scary as it is to say, I think Devon Achan, you're not going to get any value in a trade for him. Not really. There's too much risk associated with him coming off of the injury. But also, he's just this unlimited ceiling player that with a no look flip could take it 45 yards for a touchdown anytime he wants to. So I think that him and Tyreek are the two that just have such an unbelievable ceiling where they could put up 30 to 50 points in a game and you won't even blink an eye. So you kind of have to go with those guys.
I
We
agree.
before so we That's a good segue to the next guy. Kyler Murray, just like as we'll talk about the other two first, but Kyler Murray, he plays San Francisco week 15, which is a tough matchup. Then he gets Chicago, which is the third worst against quarterbacks, into Philadelphia, which is the worst against quarterbacks. For most fantasy playoffs, he'll either be playing Chicago or Philly in the championship. So that's why people are really high on Kyler. I was able to pick him up in 2 leagues, and I'm absolutely going to ride him till the end of the year just because of his schedule and how good he looks. Another guy, though, Josh Dobbs. Josh Dobbs is going to be really hard to trade for, I think, after what he did last week, but he's still worth it. If I had Lamar Jackson and I had to choose between Lamar Jackson and Joshua Dobbs, Joshua Dobbs has had a better season than Lamar Jackson, fantasy wise.
Which is wild to say.
Yes, you shouldn't be
It
able to
it
say that.
sounds it sounds blasphemous almost. Like you should just be shunned to the outskirts of all the realms by just saying those words. But it's factual.
It's it's not because he's so much more efficient either. They both have 5 interceptions. They both have 5 rushing touchdowns, but Joshua Dobbs has 11 passing touchdowns. Lamar Jackson has 10. Lamar Jackson's been able to do what he's been doing without having to do too much. He hasn't had to carry the teams to victory. Josh Dobbs is going to give you Denver this week, Chicago next week, a bye week. Then he gets Las Vegas, Cincinnati, Detroit. Detroit is going to end up, in my opinion, being a huge shootout type of a game. It's going to be two offenses that are showing up, and Detroit's defense, like they have been for the last month, is probably going to continue to be their weak link. Their offense is going to get them through these games. So I
And
think
not
Josh.
to mention he's getting Justin Jefferson is projected to be back, I believe, possibly this week. At
So
least
we don't know if
hoping
he's going to
so.
play this week. I mean, everyone's hoping, dude. It's crazy to me that they've won all the games that they've won, and he's like still not rushing back. Like I didn't think that he would rush back because their season's basically toast, and then they lost the starting quarterback. But they haven't lost since they've had Josh Dobbs. I think they've only lost 1 game since Justin Jefferson went down, and that's huge for them being able to make the
Mhm.
playoffs in an already weak conference. That's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, they're keeping themselves alive at 1000%. Now, to go to, a different position here to kind of move on to wide receivers, how do you feel about Jackson Smith and Jigba going forward?
So Jackson Smith is the third receiver on a team with Geno as the quarterback. And last year, Geno was like 67 or like 69% completion percentage for the
Don't
year.
don't write him off.
And he
Don't
was
don't
amazing.
you
And I
don't you
get that
write
this is the
Gino off.
this is the end of the year. Like This is the time where DK Metcalf generally starts to pop off. Like if you think back to every year, the last 5 or 6 weeks is where DK gets all of his work. He doesn't have a bunch of consistent starts throughout the year where he's okay. He does it now. The reason that I do like Jackson Smith is that they play San Francisco, Philly, Tennessee for the fantasy playoffs. That's ninth, first, and seventh worst against the wide receiver position. And he plays in the slot, which is going to be phenomenal. These teams, as bad as their corners are, their slot corners are even worse. That's part of why they can't stop anything is because they get beat on the outside and then also on the inside, and they're just getting beat everywhere. So I see a lot of potential value. Jackson Smith is the like I said, the third receiver on a team with Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet. They have a good offense, but they seem to kind of spread it. It's not just one person
Well,
that's going to get the
even
work.
as a third receiver, he still averages 5 to 6 targets a game, which is
Yes.
what you're looking at. And you're one twisted ankle away from DK or Lockett from Jackson Smith becoming a primary target. And he's shown, I mean, in just his since the bye week in week 5,
Which is
he's
also
put up
whenever his wrist healed.
yeah, he's put up games of 5 receptions, 48 yard, or I'm sorry, 4 receptions, 48 yards, 4 for 63, 3 for 36, 6 for 63, 4 for 53. Like you're a touchdown away from him becoming a flex lock every week.
And I think that he doesn't garnish a lot of attention. The people that have him on their team, if they're trying to decide whether or not to start him every week, then they're trying to get rid of him. You don't have to offer very much to be able to get a player like that. Obviously, in a dynasty format, they're going to hold on to him. The potential for what Jackson Smith and Jigba's career is going to be, but for redrafts, I think that everyone's going to be okay with getting rid of him, and that's why I'm so high on trying to get him. It's just like the next guy we want to talk about, Deontay Johnson. He finally had that bad week, and with having the off week, that's when people are freaking out. It's like, oh man, the Steelers' offense sucks. Do I really even want Deontay Johnson? And let me ask you, uh, Justin, would you want to finish the year with someone that's gotten 6 targets, 14 targets, 9 targets, and then finally one game of four? Whenever they play against New England, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati to finish it off?
Yeah, and then if you're the type of season that has the championship in week 17, you've got Seattle there as well. So, look, the playoff schedule looks great, and he is just shown over the time of his career he is a target monster. Green Bay is very, very good, and Jair Alexander is a top 5 cornerback in the league.
Absolutely.
So I do think you have to take that game with a grain of salt. That game was just one of those old school ugly games. Run, 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 play action, run, 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 play action, sweep, run, quarterback sneak, play action. Like
Jalen
that
Warren
game,
and Najee had great games
yeah,
too. They were
exactly.
unstoppable.
So, and Tomlin's the type of coach, he's just going to lean on that. And if his running game's working and they're getting 4 or 5 yards a carry, he's just going to keep churning it between those two guys. Rightfully so. I get it.
Now they get
So
Cleveland this week.
now this week coming up, I it's one of those to where is Cleveland going to be able to keep it close enough with Dorian Thompson Robinson starting to warrant the Steelers to be able to throw the ball enough. Now, I think Cleveland's rush defense is or run defense is good enough to where they're going to be forced to throw
Because they're
because
going to have to
I don't
do
think the
both.
run's going to be as effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, going forward, just the rest of the season, Cincinnati, Arizona, New England, Indianapolis, Cincinnati again, Seattle. Like that schedule doesn't scare me at all. So I'm completely fine holding on to him. If I'm trading for him, I'm not necessarily looking like to give up entirely too much for him.
But I would absolutely give up two bench people that are
For
never going to
me,
touch
he's a
my
great
starting lineup.
piece. for me, he's a great piece to trade away because you probably didn't invest a lot of draft capital into him. And at this point,
I mean,
you're
dude, with his
it doesn't
injury,
it
he was a
doesn't help
waiver wire
with him
pickup.
having this one game before the trade deadline.
Yes.
Like that sucks because a lot of people are low on him right now.
I don't know, man. I'm
But
happy
I don't
about
I would
Cincinnati,
hold on to
Arizona.
him.
Like
I
I'm
would
I'm
hold on
happy
to him.
about New England. I'm trading for him. Like I'm not gonna spend a lot, but that's the point. Some of the
That's the
trade
benefit
targets,
on the flip side of that game is I think you can buy low on him right now, really, really low. Like I don't
exactly.
think you have to give up much for him at all.
Not the same with this next guy to talk about. Brandon Cooks finally had a freaking game, and we have been talking about him, and we've been high on him, but not high enough to warrant necessarily trading for him before this week. But after what just happened, he has, like we said earlier, Dak Prescott's got one of the best schedules in fantasy football for the playoff run, and that means Brandon Cooks has the same schedule. They get Philly, Buffalo, Miami. Now, I think that the at Miami, them being 12th best, 12th worst against wide receivers, is a bit off because they haven't had Jalen Ramsey and they haven't had Xavier Howard for most of the year. But that's where I think Brandon Cooks will be able to be the valuable touch on that team because CeeDee Lamb is going to be blanketed. He is going to get open. He's going to get his points. He's still someone that I'm going to start against Miami. I'm not saying that at all, but I think that Brandon Cooks is going to get value in that game, and that's the Week 16 potential fantasy playoffs. Just in
Christmas
general,
Eve.
the Christmas Eve game, you're not going to have to spend anything to get this guy. Like, nobody is really like, and whoever's had him is been waiting for him to put up
Now
32 points in a week.
that's where he is the polar opposite of what we just discussed with Deontay Johnson. With the game that he's coming off of, you're going to end up having to overpay for him in a trade right now just because of 9 receptions, 173 yards, and a touchdown.
I'll ask
Like
you a question.
any owner of him's not going to be able to overlook that, and they're going to try to gouge you in a trade just
Which
because that's what they're going to lean on.
which side of the trade would you prefer to be on if it was for Brandon Cooks and Deontay Johnson? Would you prefer to be trading for Brandon Cooks? Because I feel like both players are of similar value in that like wide receiver two to flex spot. Like neither of them are really super valuable, and neither of them are absolute ass. Which one would you want?
I I would rather have Brandon Cooks because when you mention the playoff schedule and how like weak it is, you also look at Philly, Buffalo, Miami, especially Philly and Buffalo have really solid run defense. Now Buffalo's is much weaker than Philly's, but that just allows you to believe that the the Cowboys are going to be looking to throw the ball a lot more. Now, in this last game versus Philly, Cooks had 2 targets, 1 reception for 7 yards.
Yeah, against the worst pass defense in the league. Um,
Exactly. So I don't. It's pretty sketchy. You're also looking at a number one wide receiver versus a number two wide receiver,
Technically
but
number three. He technically
that
plays the slot. He's not
yeah,
always out there.
and that's but that allows. I just look at I'm picking Dak and that offense over Kenny Pickett and his offense.
Now, if I had Dak Prescott, I think Brandon Cooks would be interesting to have a little stack. That even if Brandon Cooks does nothing and Dak has a great game, he'll carry me a little bit. But Deontay Johnson is the player profile of exactly what I look for in a player. He is consistent. And I can't hope for a Hail Mary pass at the end of the game or 175-yard, catch for somebody to be valuable. I want consistency. So I would rather Deontay Johnson and that type of player every single time. Unless it was someone like Tyreek Hill, because that's special. He's consistent and also gives you super amazing big play. Him and CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen, like these guys are different. And Keenan Allen is probably the poster child of consistent wide receiver. Now, over the last couple of weeks, talking about a consistent running back, we would not be able to not mention Rashad White's name. He has been unbelievable this season with where you were able to draft him at, just the value that he's been giving you from like a fifth round, and the amount of hard matchups that this man has just said, fuck y'all, I don't care. Like, put up 10 points versus New Orleans, put up 15 points versus Atlanta. He's got San Francisco this week, which I'm not interested in. But next week is Indy, fifth worst. Then Carolina, second worst. Then he plays Atlanta again, which, like we just said, he's already had a good game against. Finishes it off with Green Bay into Jacksonville. Jacksonville is the hardest matchup besides Atlanta through like the rest of the year, and their team is so ass. I don't think that they're a hard matchup anymore. Like, I think their offense is just going to continuously make it hard on their defense.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just a matter of opportunities, right? Like you're looking at he averages just rushing the ball, he averages 15 carries a game. And in the passing game, he's also averaging 4 to 5 targets and catches a game as well. So he's touching the ball 22 to 25 times a game. So that right
RB1.
yeah, that right there is just he's a set and forget.
Yep.
Like you put him in your spot and you just don't worry about him the rest of the year.
Now,
They've
would you play
already
him
had
versus
their
San
bye.
Fran?
Yeah, because of his work out of the backfield. I mean, you look back at that Atlanta game that you just mentioned that he had a good fantasy game against. He ran the ball 13 times for only 34 yards, but he gave you 6 receptions for 65 yards.
Yep.
And that's a very similar game I could see happening versus San Francisco here.
I like that logic. Now, as far as like, we've been talking about these players and how much value they have. Um, Another player to put him up against, right? Another RB1 that is not in a super desirable situation, but Josh Jacobs. I mean, I think that you could argue that them having a rookie quarterback has helped Josh Jacobs' season, and that now they have to rely on him more. The amount of targets that he gets, just in general, like what he's looking at, has increased so much. Between those two, if you had one and were trading for the other, which one would you prefer to be trading for?
That's very tough because Josh Jacobs at this point, just with his workload, could very well finish the season again as the leading rusher in the league. I know it was a couple weeks ago, it was a really popular bet I saw going around as just a good value pick at like plus 1300. You could get him as, the leading rusher in the season. I still think I'd go Rashad White. Like, just because of I feel like he gives you more work out of the backfield, and I feel like the Bucks are still in a position right now to where they're not fully out of playoff hopes as much as the
The
Raiders
Raiders
are.
are.
Like,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't
Especially in that
care about the
division.
last 2 games that they won, like all the cigar smoking, all you beat the Giants and you beat the Zach Wilson led Jets. Like I'm not impressed. I could care
Nobody's
less.
impressed.
Congratulations, you did it with Antonio Pierce. It's a good story. Interim head coach, all of that. Awesome. I don't care. Like you're going now this week, you do it versus Miami, you shock them, you come into Miami, you're no longer playing the Jets or the Giants at home, and you do it in Miami and shut that offense down. Yeah, okay. I'll be impressed with that one.
Now, I,
But
I agree with you picking Rashad White, because week 8 against Detroit, 4 targets. Week 9 versus the Giants, obviously, he had 26 rushes for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he had 0 targets. And he had 27 rushes against the Jets, for 116 with 2 targets for 11 yards. I think that the passing game is what pushes me over the top. The having more rushes, having more touches, but more of them being rushes in almost every league I'm in is at least a half PPR. So targets are just so much more valuable. And on top of that, getting a target, getting a reception with a 10-yard average for a running back is for the elites. That's what you generally get. 6 for 65 yards is what you're looking for. And 11 points per play that they receive the ball, that's just something that you can't let go. I think Josh Jacobs is probably going to get a lot more work than Rashad White over the next couple weeks, but I think Rashad White's opportunities will be better. He'll get more touchdown opportunities, and he receives the ball.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very hard to say that. Like I said, with Josh Jacobs and the season he had last year and the work that he's gotten here the last couple weeks, but just I don't trust the Raiders. Like I said, I just don't trust them. I don't trust Aiden O'Connell leading them. I don't know how many games they're going to be in where they're actually able to lean on the run, because if you go up against an offense that forces you to score, not keep the game at 6-0 for 3 quarters, like what we just saw versus the Jets, like, I mean, yeah, you're able to lean on the run and get 20 carries a game, but when you're down by 17 points, you're not able to do that. So that's where that to me that's going to start to factor in for them,
Yep.
and that's just all she wrote really on that one. Now, I do want to get into, I mean, it's the hardest position, we say it every week. Tight ends. Now, a guy like Sam Laporta, I know at this point you're pretty much not able to trade for him just because of what he's shown you all just throughout the entire season right now. It's just been absolutely spectacular.
He has 3 games of 10 plus targets.
And you're looking at his playoff games: Chicago, Denver, Minnesota,
Oh, man.
Dallas if you go to week 17.
So much value.
Like, it's insane. Now, I do wonder though, because of how much value a tight end like that could bring you for a team that's right on the cusp of making the playoffs. Is he the type of guy that you're looking to reluctantly trade away just because of the possible haul that he could bring back to you?
Like, for example, if you were able to stack a CD Lamb and a Keenan Allen, but you had to deal with a subpar tight end like a Luke Musgrave or whoever you could stream week in, week out, the potential output of those two top end receivers is so much that there are very few rosters that'll be able to keep up with you in a championship game. Like, especially for like the Chargers, they're pushing for the playoffs so hard right now. Keenan Allen is about to go the fuck off. This is the best thing that could have happened for Keenan Allen owners. Mike Williams is hurt, and they have to win every game by passing the ball. They cannot just run it out. They have to win by passing. So I think that you're right. I think that trading away Sam Laporta to get some uber value, to get I don't want to say Devon A. Chan, but to get one of these other guys we've been talking about, like, you make a very solid point. If you could get a Trey McBride and an elite player for Sam Laporta and, a subpar player, if I could trade Deonta Johnson and Sam Laporta and get Trey McBride and, like, Brandon Cooks, no. But
Yeah, I don't know if I'm doing that one.
if I could take a step up, I mean, obviously you're not going to get CeeDee Lamb for something like that. I'm trying to think of
Now,
like
I do like
like a
you
Chris
mentioning
Olave or
I do like you mentioning Trey McBride though, because I feel like he's a tight end that is on the flip side of Laporta, to where I don't think you'd have to give up very much for him. And his schedule, as fantasy wise, the rest of the way is about middle of the tier. Like, it's not difficult, but it's not awful. He's got the bye week in week 14 right before the fantasy playoffs. So week 15 versus San Francisco, week 16 versus Chicago, and week 17 versus Philly. Now, if your fantasy playoffs start early and your championship week is in week 16, just depending on the size of your league, that could be sketchy because he very well could be on his bye week in your first round. Now, that's just dependent on how you're all set up and how your league's structured, which is just that would just be a wild situation. That is a really late bye week. That's actually
Yeah, I don't like it.
um but going forward these next few weeks, you've got Houston, you've got the Rams, you've got Pittsburgh, and then you've got that bye week, and then San Francisco. So for me, he's somebody that you could buy low on right now, and he could possibly finish out the year as your every week tight end one.
I think that Trey McBride is an every week tight end one for the rest of the season. Like, regardless of if you have to trade for him or not, if he's still available on waiver wires, which is crazy to me that he's still not 100% owned, because tight
In
end is so
in
hard to hit
two of the
on.
last 3 weeks, he's had over 9 receptions, or over 8 receptions, and over 95 yards.
That's ridiculous for a tight end. And he just finally, we saw for the first time what it looks like whenever he plays with his starting quarterback.
Yep.
For the first time this season. He last year he was a rookie all year, and Kyler got hurt like week 12 or something, so he didn't even get the whole season. Yeah, I think that we left you guys with some stuff to talk about, some stuff to think about. These are some people that are mid-level people. They're going to give you some value, but they're not exactly the guy. Last year, to leave you with some food for thought, James Conner ended the final 5 weeks like the running back 4 last year, and Kirk Cousins was the quarterback 1. So fantasy football is not always won by the guy that you're expecting. Sometimes it's the guy that you're not expecting that's going to be the most valuable asset on your team, and a lot of that has to do with schedule. So for everyone out there, make sure you go to Tulsi Rose Tea at tulsirosetea.com for all of your tea needs. They've got over 100 flavors of loose tea. And check us back tomorrow for Friday for the fans. We do it for you. We're going to do a live show just for you. So like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, peace.
Doodles.